The biggest driver transfer in years will take place at the end of this season as Lewis Hamilton has left Mercedes after a decade with the team to move to Ferrari for 2025. The Mercedes team have been given a year to decide who to replace their 7-time world champion driver and have a big decision to make. But for me, there should be just one driver at the top of the list. So why should the team pick Fernando Alonso? Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. Options to replace the irreplaceable. The Mercedes team will have a queue of talented drivers at the door who want to drive for a team that has won 8 world championships since 2014. But with the team not in a competitive position since the change in aerodynamic regulations, their appeal may be reducing. For me, with the team on the way down compared to where they were just a few years ago, the decision they make for their driver lineup will be critical to where they believe they sit as a team. With the driver move taking place in 2025, the team will just be 1 year away from a power unit regulation change that could see Mercedes have the opportunity to get back to the front of the F1 grid, just as they achieved in 2014 when the engine rules last changed. As such, the team's 2025 drivers will need to be competitive in order to be able to compete with top-tier driver lineups at Ferrari, Red Bull and McLaren. It feels like with some of the driver pairings on that grid, the team will need a pairing of elite drivers. There have been several options linked with the move to Mercedes for 2025. These potential contenders include Fernando Alonso, Carlos Sainz, Alex Albon, Esteban Ocon, Mick Schumacher and Kimi Antonelli. Each of these drivers have their own merits and downsides, and some are far more likely to be in consideration than others. But it's critical for Mercedes to make their choice based on where the team is and where they aspire to be. Realistically, replacing Lewis Hamilton like for like is impossible. He's a 7-time world champion and statistically the most successful F1 driver of all time. But, based on some of the potential options, Fernando Alonso is a driver at a similar stage in his career to Hamilton and is a proven world champion. Carlos Sainz is a proven race winner for Ferrari and has been excellent for that team and was a brilliant driver for McLaren previously. And Kimi Antonelli would represent a driver that would be a rookie but has the potential to be an exceptional driver in the future. It seems like these 3 drivers are perhaps the most likely candidates, in addition to Alex Albon. So, from a Mercedes point of view, they have several options, and it feels like none of them are ideal. Of course, the team had anticipated that Hamilton would be driving for the team in 2025. Right now, I think Fernando Alonso is the best option for the team, but this is subject to some other factors. But before I tell you about those, make sure you get into the comments to let me know who you think is the best option for Mercedes, and while you're there, you should definitely subscribe to the channel as well. Fernando Alonso has the right credentials. Fernando Alonso is in the latter stages of his career, and if he was to join Mercedes in 2025, he would be 43 years old. However, he is a 2-time world champion and has proved in his time at Aston Martin that he remains capable and comfortable at the front of the F1 grid, achieving 8 podium finishes in 2023. In my opinion, the Mercedes team will see Kimi Antonelli as their future option to race alongside George Russell. The Italian driver is just 17 years old and will be a rookie on the F2 grid this year, but he is hotly tipped to be the future star. It makes sense for Mercedes to want to keep Antonelli on the books, and if he delivers on the expectations on his shoulders this year, then there will be no doubting the fact that Antonelli will be ready to join the Formula 1 grid. But while he'll be ready for Formula 1, Mercedes' recent academy graduate in George Russell was put in a Williams for 3 years before finally getting his chance to race in the Mercedes team full time. So the Mercedes team is perhaps in need of a stopgap driver, someone who can deliver in the short term. For me, the answer is simple. It's Fernando Alonso. There are several elite drivers in Formula 1, but if the Mercedes team want to be able to compete with the driver lineup of Ferrari, who by this point will have Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton, the Silver Arrows will have to pick Alonso. Alonso's last 3 years since returning to the Formula 1 grid has been exceptional. With Alpine, Alonso was excellent. In 2022, he was at his best as he delivered excellent results for the team. Although, if you just look at the statistics, you wouldn't believe that this was the case. Alonso scored just 81 points to Ocon's 92, but throughout the season Alonso was plagued with issues ranging from engine failures, hydraulic issues, electrical issues and pit stop blunders. There are a range of estimates as to how many points this cost the Spanish driver, but he claimed it cost him more than 70. If he was to have gained just 50 more than his total tally, he'd have jumped 2 positions in the standings and have been comfortably ahead of his teammate. So it was clear that Alonso was the strongest driver at the Alpine team that year, and he was let down by the team around him. Alonso's move to Aston Martin surprised the grid. He was moving to a team that finished lower in the Constructors' Championship standings than Alpine. This was a surprise to the Formula One world, and it felt like the final roll of the dice for his career. The Spanish driver had clearly been frustrated by some of the issues he'd faced with Alpine, and it's somewhat understandable when you look at the amount of issues he's faced throughout 2022. It turned out to be an excellent decision, as of course Aston Martin made excellent progress with their 2023 cars and propelled themselves up the championship standings. Their fast start soon slowed though, as this team struggled to develop their car through the season, but on the whole, Alonso was in a much happier place and was much higher up the order. But perhaps this move has exposed a potential weakness of Alonso. Throughout his career, Alonso has made several disappointing career moves. His move to join Aston Martin was perhaps one of his best, as he made a step up the order. But Alonso has historically not had the best relationships with teams when things have started to go wrong. Historic examples of this has included his 2 stints with McLaren, where at first he was up against Lewis Hamilton during the Spygate saga, and the second where the McLaren's team moved to Honda power units backfired and resulted in the team plummeting down the order. During both of these stints, Alonso publicly criticised the team and was visibly frustrated by the team's lack of performance. Similarly, with Alpine, Alonso was critical of the team in 2022 when things weren't going to plan. This rocky past with teams that have failed to provide him with a strong car suggests he can be a tricky driver to please, and this could create some challenges in the Mercedes team if he fails to get a car that meets his expectations. And the key point for me in whether Fernando Alonso would want to move to Mercedes hinges on the fact that he has much more to lose from where Aston Martin are today compared to where he's been previously. It's not like he's racing for a midfield setup anymore. He's driving for a team that finished 5th in the Constructors' Championship in 2023, and a team that provided him with the opportunity to score 8 podiums, and one that supported him to 4th in the Drivers' Championship, his best championship finish since 2013. And if he had a teammate who was of a similar calibre, I'm sure Aston Martin would have been much higher in the standings last year. During this time, Mercedes has been ahead of Aston Martin, but the fact that Lewis Hamilton has opted to leave that team and activate his brake clause implies that the data doesn't suggest that the Mercedes team will be making significant progress towards Red Bull in the next couple of years. Either way, it feels like Alonso has now got something to lose by making a move, and so he'll want to make the right choice. But for me, it makes sense from an objective standpoint. Why it's a no-brainer for Mercedes, in my opinion. Mercedes are a top team in Formula One, and they look like they'll be in competition with Ferrari and McLaren once again in 2024. But both of these competitors have incredibly strong driver lineups set for 2025. The combination of Leclerc and Hamilton and Norris and Piastri will be incredibly difficult to beat, and is a great indication that to compete at the top of the sport, the teams will require 2 drivers that are top tier if they want to compete. So for me, if Mercedes wants to continue their progress and see themselves as a team that's ready and capable of competing with these other setups at the front of the grid, then they need to pick a proven and experienced driver to replace Hamilton. Right now, Hamilton and Russell are one of the strongest driver pairings in the sport, and so I believe Mercedes will aim to maintain a driver pairing that is comparable to these other teams. Out of the 4 more likely options, there are 3 potential drivers that offer this, with these being Alonso, Albon and Sainz. However, the Mercedes team will want their long-term driver pairing to be Antonelli and Russell, and so to make this happen, the driver that needs to replace Hamilton needs to be a short-term option. The only driver that offers this is Alonso, as both Albon and Sainz will be more difficult to replace in a few years' time, as they will remain in their prime and make it more difficult to make the call to remove them. If Mercedes choose Antonelli to replace Hamilton for 2025, then they'll be putting themselves in a position where they have an unproven driver lineup. I would argue that picking the Italian driver would show a lack of short-term desire, and while this driver pairing will likely turn into a top lineup in years to come, they won't be at the same level with a rookie in the team. You have to bear in mind that this team put George Russell in the Williams for 3 seasons, where he earned his stripes and proved he was ready to compete in the Mercedes. Russell was a Formula 2 world champion and achieved that feat in his rookie season, but he was still given the time and space to prove himself in Formula 1. Perhaps the world of Formula 1 has moved on since 2019, and maybe other teams wouldn't want to support Mercedes by offering Antonelli a seat, but for me, it would be a huge risk to put the Italian driver straight into the top team. So considering all of the rumoured options for Mercedes, it seems like it's a no-brainer for the team to pick Fernando Alonso. He's the most like-for-like replacement and the best available option, given his contract expires at the end of the year. But the one thing that could cause a roadblock for this would be the fact that Alonso might not be interested in the move. He's in a good place with Aston Martin and may well be on course for another competitive season. Historically, Alonso's poor driver moves have meant he's lost out and missed out on some great opportunities to compete further up the order. But if I was in the position to pick the Hamilton replacement, I'd be going for Fernando Alonso first.